Have you ever heard of a book that you're not supposed to read? Not because it's banned, not because it's dangerous in a political sense, but because reading it might fracture your mind. A book that disguises itself as a play, a script written in 2 acts, set in a city that doesn't exist, about a masked figure whose name should never be spoken twice. A play that, according to those who have glimpsed it, ends with something so horrifying, so fundamentally wrong, that no one has ever read it to the final line and come back the same. Some don't come back at all. Not just a story, not just a myth, but a virus of the mind. A piece of writing so potent it's been whispered about in the darkest corners of literature, psychology, and the occult for over a century. A play that appears in fragmented form in a strange little book published in 1895, and that somehow changed everything. In this video, we're going to unravel the terrifying truth behind The King in Yellow. We'll ask who really wrote it. We'll explore the cursed content of the play itself, and we'll try to understand why a story that never fully reveals itself has haunted so many for so long. Because this isn't just about a character in a yellow robe. This is about the idea of him, the mask, the city, the ruin. This is The King in Yellow, explained in obsessive detail. And you may want to think twice before watching till the end. Think about it carefully. A play where no one has ever walked out sane or alive if they have witnessed its final act. A theatrical performance that doesn't exist in full anywhere, that no one has ever read from beginning to end. And yet, it keeps resurfacing, whispered about, feared, obsessively studied. And behind all the mystery stands the question we're going to ask today. The name printed on the cover is Robert W. Chambers, a relatively obscure American writer who, in 1895, published a book of short stories under that title. A mix of tales, some romantic, some strange, and a few that feel like they were never meant to be read. These are the stories that mention a forbidden play, a cursed script, The King in Yellow. But here's the thing. Chambers never gives us the full text, only fragments, cryptic lines, scattered verses. It's like he knew that writing the entire play would be a mistake, like the play didn't belong to him at all, like it came from somewhere else, and he was just the vessel. And he might not have been the first. According to scattered accounts and deeper literary myths, an unknown figure, possibly named Castaigne, discovered the remnants of this play long before Chambers. They say he compiled pieces of it, rewrote some, added others, then tried to kill himself. Some say he succeeded, some say he didn't, but something broke inside him. That much is certain, and the rabbit hole goes deeper. Some researchers believe that the first scenes of Act 1 were written by Christopher Marlowe, the same man behind Dr. Faustus. Others go further, claiming Shakespeare himself had the manuscript in his possession, that he tried to finish it and failed, not because of time or distraction, but because something about the text disturbed him to the core. Legend says he left it behind in one of his homes, and when the landlord later gathered the scattered papers, he accidentally combined The King in Yellow with poems written by his own wife. What came out of that mess was unnatural, an abomination of stitched-together theater, mysticism, and insanity. A manuscript that was rediscovered years later by Castaigne, and finally published, quietly, through Chambers in 1895. But here's what no one talks about. After publishing the book, Chambers never wrote about The King in Yellow again. Not once, not a word. It's like he wanted to distance himself from it, like he regretted ever touching it, like he opened a door and spent the rest of his life trying to forget what he saw on the other side. So, let's ask again. Who really wrote The King in Yellow? Chambers, Castaigne, Marlowe, Shakespeare, or maybe none of them. Maybe they were just the scribes, the tools, the open mouths through which something older spoke. So let's go deeper now, not into the author, but into the play itself. Into The King in Yellow, that elusive script whose mere existence fractures minds and reshapes perception. And the first thing you need to understand is this. No one has ever seen the complete play. What we know about it comes from fragments, retellings, footnotes, and survivors who never truly came back whole. And yet, despite the gaps, or perhaps because of them, The King in Yellow has taken on a life of its own. The structure of the play is deceptively simple. 2 acts, that's all. But what happens between those acts, and especially after the curtain rises on the second one, has been the subject of obsession, speculation, and dread for more than a century. The first act is reportedly calm, quiet, even beautiful. It introduces a royal court, a decaying kingdom, a mysterious visitor, and a looming sense of unease. It's the silence before the storm. Characters like Casilda, Camilla, and a stranger with a pale mask are introduced against the backdrop of a city called Yetil, a city that may or may not exist outside the dreamlike geometry of a cursed cosmos. That mask is important, almost sacred, because the stranger doesn't speak of where he's from or why he's come, only that he carries with him a symbol, the yellow sign, and a silence that unsettles everyone who looks at him too long. And then, during a masquerade ball, a moment that has become infamous in the scattered myths of the play, someone makes the mistake of asking him why he hasn't removed his mask like everyone else. And the stranger replies, "I wear no mask." That's the moment everything begins to unravel. That's the moment where the audience, or the reader, or the dreamer realizes this was never a simple story. It was a ritual, a summoning. The city across the lake, Carcosa, a name that shouldn't exist, begins to manifest. Time and space bend. The stars go wrong. And before the second act ends, every character is either dead, insane, or lost in a dream they'll never wake from. But that's only one version of the play. There's another, possibly born from a different draft, or a different dimension, depending on who you ask. And in this one, the story unfolds in a city called Aster, locked in a long and hopeless war. The queen, Casilda, is urged by her children to abdicate, to end the bloodshed. She refuses, and then, as if summoned by her pride, another stranger arrives. Again, he wears a pale mask. Again, he bears the yellow sign. This time, he proposes peace. He tells the queen that if everyone in Astur wears a mask, if every citizen takes on the same anonymous face, the mysterious city of Carcosa across the lake will interpret it as a sign of surrender, or at least of goodwill. They comply. The masquerade begins. And just like before, at the height of the celebration, the stranger removes his mask, only to reveal he was never wearing one. But in this version, the consequences are more apocalyptic. Carcosa does not offer mercy. Instead, the King in Yellow descends in wrath, not just punishing the stranger, but laying waste to the entire region. And then he gives Casilda an ultimatum. If she wants to preserve what's left of her city, then every soul in Aster, for every generation to come, must wear the mask. Forever. No one may remove it, not in life, not in death. Because if they do, the king will return, and he always returns. What's so unsettling about these two versions is that they're mutually incompatible, and yet equally true. It's as if the play doesn't have a single canonical form, as if it rewrites itself depending on who's looking. Some readers claim different cities, different outcomes. Some insist it's always the same stranger, others that he shifts form. Sometimes it's a political allegory, sometimes a tragedy, sometimes an invitation. And maybe that's the point. Because what if The King in Yellow isn't a play at all? What if it's a mirror, a kind of sentient text that shows you not what's written on the page, but what's lurking in your own mind, waiting to be revealed? What if the real horror is that the play knows you better than you know yourself, and it adapts to show you exactly what you shouldn't see? It wouldn't be the first time literature was used as a weapon, but in this case, the weapon isn't language, it's something behind the language. Something that bleeds through the words, warping reality just enough to let something else in. That's why no one ever remembers the second act clearly. That's why it always ends in silence, madness, or both. Because The King in Yellow is not entertainment, it's exposure. And if you find yourself hearing whispers after reading it, or seeing things in the corners of your vision, or dreaming of cities that don't exist on Earth, it's already too late. So, who or what is the King in Yellow? It's a question that haunts every reader who's dared to peer into the veil of this mythos, because he's not simply a character, not in the way you might think. He isn't a villain you can understand or a god you can worship. The King in Yellow is a presence, a distortion, a conceptual parasite that infects narrative, identity, and sanity itself. In the fragmented stories of Robert W. Chambers, the king is rarely described, and when he is, the details don't clarify, they confuse. He's said to wear tattered, ancient robes of yellow that seem to ripple unnaturally, as if made of light, smoke, or memory. His face is never shown, because he wears the pale mask, and yet, beneath that mask, there may be no face at all. Or worse, there may be too many. The King in Yellow isn't a monster, he's a presence, a parasite of narrative and identity. He doesn't chase you, he rewrites you, and the yellow sign, it's not just a symbol, it's a key, a sigil that, once seen, begins to erode the line between memory and fiction, self and story. Those who glimpse it find themselves drawn to forgotten theaters, cities that shouldn't exist, and dreams they can't wake from. And as the mark spreads, time distorts, identity fractures, and something begins to whisper behind the mask. He doesn't speak. He doesn't need to. Because once you've seen the sign, you're already part of the story. But if the king is the virus, then the yellow sign is the contagion. The yellow sign is not a symbol in the traditional sense. It is not simply a glyph to be interpreted. It is a key, a sigil, an infection written into geometry. Those who see it often do not recognize what they're looking at first. But the moment they do, something happens. Something starts, a dream, a shift, a tear in the fabric of identity. Sometimes it appears as a twisted loop, part Ouroboros, part Triskelion, part insect wing made of ink and madness. Sometimes it's burned into the sky in a dream. Sometimes it shows up in a forgotten book, a tattoo, a chalk drawing at the edge of a child's vision. And once you've seen it, it sees you. Those who bear the yellow sign often find themselves drawn to forbidden places, to decaying cities, to lost theaters where the play is whispered through crumbling pages. The sign does not just mark you, it rewrites you, like a worm inserted into the structure of the soul. And as that mark spreads, your sense of time breaks down. Memory becomes fiction, identity becomes fluid, and eventually you start to hear him. In some tellings, he is the high priest of Carcosa. In others, he is Carcosa itself, personified. In yet others, he is an avatar of a greater being, Haster, the unspeakable one, whose name Lovecraft would later tie into his own mythos. But unlike the cold, indifferent cosmic forces of Cthulhu or Azathoth, the King in Yellow is personal, intimate. He doesn't destroy planets. He destroys the mind, slowly, elegantly, like a play performed for one audience member at a time. What's terrifying is not what he does. It's that he makes you love him while he does it. In the stories, those touched by the yellow sign don't scream in horror, not at first. They grow silent, obsessive. They draw the sign. They repeat the lines. They beg others to watch the play. It spreads not through violence, but through fascination. It seduces with beauty. It promises revelation. And it delivers something else entirely. He is madness disguised as enlightenment, artifice mistaken for truth. And if you look too long into the pale mask, you begin to forget what your own face looked like. That's the genius of this myth, the true horror. The King in Yellow is not content with being a myth. He becomes a metaphor for obsession, for mental illness, for the terrifying idea that beauty can destroy, that truth can dissolve, that art itself can be a weapon. Now, Lovecraft didn't invent the King in Yellow. That honor or curse belongs to Robert W. Chambers. But Lovecraft read him, he studied him, and more importantly, he absorbed him. You see, Lovecraft never directly wrote about the King in Yellow. He never adapted the play, never described the pale mask or the yellow sign in any official story. But that's not how mythologies grow, not the dark ones anyway. Instead, Lovecraft did what Chambers had done before him. He implied, he hinted, he let the madness creep in between the lines. Because Lovecraft didn't need to name the king to let him in. What he did was pick up the thread, that yellow thread. He wove it into his own tales, not as a focal point, but as background radiation, a subtle contamination. And suddenly, names like Carcosa, Hali, and above all, Hastur started to appear in Lovecraft's world, not explained, never explained, just present, like echoes of a song no one should remember. And that's where things get complicated. Because in Chambers' original stories, Hastur was just a location, a lost city mentioned in whispers. But when Lovecraft got his hands on the name, something shifted. It became something more, a being, a presence, an entity, possibly even one of the great old ones. So, was Hastur the king in yellow? Maybe, maybe not. Lovecraft never tells us, but he positions Hastur as one of the outer forces, a cosmic being tied to madness and decay. And suddenly, the yellow sign isn't just a cursed symbol in a forbidden book. It's part of a larger cosmic virus, one that spreads through knowledge, through art, through curiosity. In this way, the King in Yellow becomes something even more dangerous, an interloper in the mythos, a rogue virus. Lovecraft didn't invent, but couldn't ignore, and maybe didn't fully understand. Some scholars have suggested that the King in Yellow is Hastur. Others say he's an avatar, a mask, a reflection. Others claim he's a separate entity entirely, a patient zero in the infection of madness that defines cosmic horror. And Lovecraft, he left the door open, intentionally, because the scariest part wasn't defining the king. It was not defining him. Just like Chambers, Lovecraft knew that the most terrifying ideas are the ones that lurk just out of reach, half-named, half-seen, ideas that whisper instead of scream, ideas that grow. And so, without ever writing about him directly, Lovecraft made the King in Yellow a permanent part of his mythos. After exploring the origins of the play and the figure behind the mask, the next logical question is, how does a fictional entity from an obscure 1895 book end up shaping one of the most critically acclaimed crime dramas of the 21st century? The answer is True Detective. When HBO released True Detective in 2014, the audience expected a Southern Gothic crime thriller, two detectives chasing a serial killer in the swamps of Louisiana. What they didn't expect was a slow descent into philosophical nihilism, occult horror, and something that looked suspiciously like the King in Yellow bleeding through the cracks of reality. At the surface, the story follows Rust Cola and Marty Hart, two detectives with opposing worldviews. Marty is a conventional man, religious, patriotic, self-assured. Rust, by contrast, is a deeply damaged nihilist, a former undercover narcotics officer who lost his daughter and, arguably, his sanity. He believes consciousness is a mistake, a tragic evolutionary accident, and that the universe is indifferent at best. As they investigate a series of grotesque murders involving mutilated bodies, antler-crowned corpses, child disappearances, and strange twig-like symbols, a deeper, older pattern begins to emerge. The victims aren't random. The killers aren't acting alone. There's a structure behind the chaos, a ritual, and whispered in the background, in old case files and fragmented testimonies, are two names: Carcosa and the Yellow King. To those familiar with Robert W. Chambers' work, these references are like a flare gun in the dark. Carcosa is the doomed city mentioned in The King in Yellow, a place outside of time, existing perhaps in another dimension, beneath the black stars of Aldebaran. It is described as decayed, alien, and fundamentally unknowable. It is the throne of the Yellow King, a figure who wears a pallid mask and whose presence infects reality with madness. Those who speak of Carcosa or the Yellow King often lose their minds, or lose themselves. In True Detective, this influence becomes literal. The series doesn't depict monsters or magic explicitly, but it does suggest that the evil being investigated is more than human. The cult responsible for the murders isn't just sadistic, they're religious. They believe in something, an invisible presence, a king, a realm, and at the heart of it all is Errol Childress, the final antagonist, a monstrous man living in a decaying manor, surrounded by corpses and rot. He speaks in riddles and refers to Carcosa like someone who's been there. His home contains what appears to be a ritual site, spirals on the walls, bones arranged like sigils, and a tunnel that leads into complete darkness. It's there that Rust experiences something, a vision, a breach in reality, a swirling vortex, a portal perhaps, between our world and Carcosa. This is not simply a hallucination. It's a symbol that something larger, older, and darker is at work. But what makes True Detective truly Lovecraftian and truly faithful to the King in Yellow isn't the aesthetics. It's the philosophical core, the idea that evil is systemic, that horror doesn't come from individual acts, but from the structures we live in, the beliefs we refuse to question, and the lies we tell ourselves to stay sane. In True Detective, Carcosa is not just a place, it's a metaphor for the hidden sickness of our world. The spiral isn't just a symbol, it's the pattern of human corruption, repeating endlessly. Rust Cole embodies this descent. His personal trauma, his drug abuse, his refusal to believe in hope, all of it makes him the perfect reader of the invisible play. He begins as a man convinced of the futility of life, but by the end, after confronting the cult, facing the abyss, and seeing, possibly literally, a glimpse of another dimension, he changes. He says, "I could feel my daughter's love there, in the darkness." That line broke people, because it suggested that even in a world ruled by chaos and death, something might survive. Something not rational, not provable, but real. And that's what The King in Yellow is truly about. Not jump scares, not monsters, but the unbearable idea that meaning exists, and that it may destroy us to see it. In True Detective, the Yellow King is never shown. He is only referenced, only whispered, but that's enough. Because the danger was never in seeing him. It was in understanding him, and in realizing, far too late, that you already have. So, after all this, what do we make of The King in Yellow? A play no one finishes, a city that shouldn't exist, a god that wears a mask not to hide, but to invite. It's not just a story, it's a question, one that never really wants an answer, and maybe that's the point. Because there's something terrifying about the unknown, not monsters, not gore, but the quiet horror that comes from realizing that some truths should never be known, that some stories were never meant to be told, and that maybe the play was never meant to be read, only remembered in fragments, in dreams, in madness. The King in Yellow is still here, not because we understand him, but because we don't. Because he lingers in the space between fiction and reality. And every time someone says his name, he takes one step closer. So, if something about this video stuck with you, if you feel like part of it followed you out, maybe you read too far, maybe you saw too much. But don't worry, that's how it starts for everyone. If you want to keep exploring the hidden corners of cosmic horror and mind-bending sci-fi, give this video a like, it helps more than you know, and subscribe so you don't miss the next descent. This is the Great Abyss, and trust me, we've only just begun to spiral.